Let's see if this sounds familiar to anyone. I know that I'm not happy where I am right now, and I knew where I need to go or what I should be doing. I even see a door open in front of me, and I will go the second that the universe guarantees that going through that door will be successful, that will bring me no discomfort whatsoever, and oh yeah, by the way, I don't have to change myself at all. Modim l'simcha, Shabbat shalom, Chag sameach. You have found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up some Chag, some holiday Torah together. We have an amazing example of this type of dialogue between Moses, between Moshe Rabbeinu and the Eternal in this week's Torah portion. It's Shabbat, Chol, Hamoed, Sukkot, so the Shabbat that's in the middle of the Feast of Booths, or the Sukkot holiday. And so we have a special reading from starting in chapter 33 of Exodus. It'd be Parshat Ki Tisa during the normal yearly readings. And we have a dialogue that sounds a little bit like that. All right, I'll do it only when I get guarantees. And it's one of those a little bit of an eye roll sort of narratives in the Torah, because it feels like, well, how could that possibly happen? If I had been in that situation, I wouldn't have argued with God in that way, which falls into an all too common logical fallacy that we have. To be brutal for a second, it's the same logical fallacy for anyone who says, gee, if I would have been alive during the writing of Torah, I would have said slavery was bad instead of just coming up with rules for it, because of course I would have been the person on the face of the planet where every group on the face of this planet enslaved other groups until essentially modern history, yet somehow I would have been the exception. And the answer is no, none of us would have been the exception, because even if we had that wisdom, we would have been completely subsumed by empires who deal with outliers much more cruelly than today we are dealt with. But it seems like in Torah we enter into this type of logical fallacy all the time. If I had been there, and this is one of the big ones, well, if I had just experienced the miracles of leaving slavery and the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, then I certainly wouldn't have argued with God. And I've seen this reaction in congregations. I've had this reaction myself in my life. We read certain passages and we say, if I had been there. So like the very famous passage of the people grumbled. This is right after all these massive miracles of crossing the Sea of Reeds and escaping slavery. And then all of a sudden, oh, if we were back in Egypt making bricks, at least we knew where our food was coming from. Showing something that is incredibly unpleasantly true, which is that the everyday miraculous things that happen to us don't leave a lasting impression. That's actually part of the role, archetypally, that Pharaoh plays in the entire plague and Exodus dialogue, is to show how little impact miraculous things can actually happen in our lives. We see over and over again pretty intensely scary plagues going on, and we get the phrase over and over again that God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And there's several verbs that are associated with it. We get several statements like ki ani hichbadati et libo, something that feels very disturbing if our vision of God is anthropomorphic, a sort of Santa Claus up in the sky. But if it's a reflection of human and life reality, it makes a lot more sense. And quite frankly, everything in the Torah where we have a translation of hardened heart, I think that the better translation would be something like entered into cognitive dissonance, right? Pharaoh saw the horrible things and the people dying around him. And what happened? He entered into the cognitive dissonance of rule number 1, I'm always right. Rule number 2, if something contradicts that, see rule number 1. Pharaoh in the narrative believed himself to be God. And so therefore, when another God was challenging that, see rule number 1, I'm God. If you want to have some fun, just reinterpret the entire Pharaoh story as an argument between the id, plagues, the ego, Pharaoh, and the superego, Moses. But that's a discussion for a completely different day. But this dialogue with Moses feels particularly egregious because he's not one of us. He's the greatest of all prophets in our tradition. And it'd be one thing for us to ignore the miracles. We weren't there at the burning bush. We weren't there 40 days and 40 nights on top of Sinai. And so sure, if I grumble a little bit, what's a little bit of grumbling? It's what I do. But Moshe Rabbeinu enters this dialogue at the beginning of this Torah reading, essentially saying, all right, you told me that I'm going to lead, and you told me that you're going to help me lead, and you told me that you know me by name as a unique individual, and you told me that I have gained favor with you. But if all those things are actually true, then tell me all about your ways. Now, again, this is post-plagues, post-Exodus, post-revelation on Sinai. Let me know your ways, said the recipient of revelation, The Eternal reassures him, yes, I'm going to go ahead and lead with you. Moses replies, yeah. Unless you're with me, I ain't going. Because, we're going to be seen by some people out there that are really scary. Unless they see you, we're just going to get smacked. And then it continues on to one of my favorite mystical dialogues in the entire Torah. Show me your presence. The Eternal replies, well, I'll show you where I've been, but no one can see my face and live. Stay tuned next week for V'zot HaBracha, the end of Torah, for Simchat Torah, where I talk about that. But this dialogue, it seems a little bit absurd, even if it's kind of exactly how I started this entire discussion, that we're there all the time. We know we're not supposed to be where we are. We see the door in front of us. We know what we have to do. And then the negotiation starts. I'll only go if. So what I want to actually do is read the text of a few verses and break it down, because there's two parts to this. One of them is the demands that Moses makes on the Eternal, and the second is the answer that's given by the Eternal. Because again, if we're thinking of God as the bearded dude in the sky, then this is, all right, person with big sword and shiny armor and long beard, stand and show everyone you and walk in front of us, and then as soon as we can all see you clearly, we'll go ahead and follow you as if you are a great warlord. And I don't think even in the times of Torah this was meant. So the reaction that is given is then really helping us understand, well, when we begin our own process of negotiation. So we start reading in chapter 33 of Exodus, Shemot, verse 12. Moses said to the Eternal, see, you say to me, lead this people forward, but you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. Further, you have said, I've singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor. Now again, seeing this as a conversation between two people, it feels absurd. As long as we maintain the Eternal being a human, an elevated human, but just like a human, then this is an absurd argument with a very whiny Moshe Rabbeinu. If we remove the anthropomorphism, if we remove the human, the demand that God be just like us, meaning an extension of our ego, we end up with, well, the sort of dialogue that we have with ourselves all the time. Moses in a deep trance, in a meditation, saying, I think you've shown me that I'm special, but I'm really, really scared because we've just gotten through, well, the army behind us is no longer behind us. And so the swords and the chariots and the spears that were driving people along with me, they're no longer there. And now I actually have to really lead. I don't know what I'm doing. And so Moses continues in verse 13, now if I have truly gained favor, pray let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider too that this nation is your people. So the bargaining is impressive here, and we'll get back to the specifics of what Moses is saying. The first answer we get in verse 14, and the Eternal said, I will go in the lead and will lighten your burden, which again sounds pretty cool if we're talking to a person. But if we are tied into a greater wisdom, then what reassurance is actually being experienced here? And indeed, what comes next doesn't make sense in a conversation between a human-like deity and a person, but makes a lot more sense as we struggle with our greater relationship with that which is greater than us. Our destiny, our fate, our duty, our contract in this world to give the best of ourselves to make the world a better place. I'm bargaining with the universe, and then all of a sudden I have a sense of, it's going to be okay. How often is that good enough for us? Because indeed, Moses continues in verse 15, and he replied, unless you go in the lead, do not make me leave this place. Right after he's been reassured, right after the reassurance was specifically, I will go in the lead, Moses responds, well, unless you go in the lead. This is not a dialogue between humans. This is a dialogue between, I know what I have to do, and I have enough proof now that I know what I'm doing. And I'm still really, really scared. I'm scared because I don't trust myself, and I'm scared because I'm not really sure that I actually am a leader. The bargaining continues in verse 16, for how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us, so that we may be distinguished, your people and I, from every people on the face of the earth? And the final answer we get then in verse 17, or at least in this part of the dialogue, and the Eternal said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name. In other words, no new information whatsoever. A repetition of the exact promises that have been there. You go, I'll lead, and you're the leader. You're special in this particular situation. You have a special role that requires you to have this greater dialogue. Now, I want to go back to verses 12 and 13 to break down the request, to break down the bargaining, to break down the incredibly universal archetypal things that are happening here in Moses' psychology. We start again with, see you say to me, lead this people forward. So again, this is the equivalent of, I know I'm not supposed to be where I am. I know I'm supposed to go there. There's a door open in front of me. There's something universal psychologically, something in Jungian psychology that I think is really best expressed by the spiritual teacher Carolyn Mace, who talks about the 4 universal archetypes, one of them being the saboteur, which when we hear that, we automatically think, well, we all sabotage others. No, what she's talking about is every time we are on the cusp of spiritual advancement, we find the reasons to not do the things that will spiritually advance us. We sabotage ourselves. Look at how the saboteur comes up here. Moses already has led. He knows he can lead. The people have followed him. He has had revelation through this relationship he has with his greater understanding, through the uniqueness of who he is as a person. And the request is lead. The request is, where do I put my foot next? Because if I put my foot next and it is by my energy alone, they're going to tear me apart. In other words, I don't have anyone to blame if it goes wrong. But you see, if you step out in front of me, oh universe, oh God, if you are the one, if you give me a sign that's so clear that I have to walk through that door, then if everything goes wrong, well, I don't have to blame myself. I get to blame you. Look at the person who is up there in front of me. Look at what I was told to do. It's not me. And this wonderful hidden thing later on the verse, but you have not made known to me who you will send with me. The Hebrew is wonderful here. Lo horatani et asher tishlach imi. You have not caused me to know, right? The external force has not come in. I need something more than what I already know. There's 2 desires going on right here that are, once again, incredibly universal. Desire number 1 is that we've got someone to go with us to share the burdens. That's why this entire discussion we're having right now is usually about one of 2 things. I know what I'm supposed to do, and I know that I'm not happy where I am. When we're having that discussion, we're usually talking about job or relationship. And if we're in the wrong relationship, then we've got no one to accompany us when we step out into the unknown. And so partnership and journey are intrinsically tied together, no matter how much we think we can do everything by ourselves. And by partnership, I don't necessarily even mean intimate partnership. Sometimes it is business partnerships. Sometimes it is the sibling who partners with you in life. Sometimes it is a deep, specific sort of friendship. This doesn't have to be any sort of partnership. We can define that as we want. But us being alone, there's a reason that the sanest of people put into solitary confinement will go insane. We are only able to be fully human through the encounter with other. And Moses, even with the partnership of both Aaron and Miriam, he's still feeling alone. He still feels like he doesn't have anyone to share this burden with him, or he doesn't feel like that person has been ordained to share that burden with him. And so Moses is saying, in order to go forward, I need the correct partner with whom I can go forward. And then this further, you have said, I've singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor. I've given several sermons recently that really put this point forward. This idea that it's easier to remember the bad things than the good things. And that when we do the good things, or when we do that first thing, that we have to name it, right? If we are afraid to speak with our boss about something that is going wrong, and we avoid it, and we're having trouble, and then one day we do it. One day we go and say, listen, we have to have this discussion. After that moment, we are no longer the person who is afraid to have the discussion with our boss. At that point, we have become the person who has had the discussion with our boss. But unless we name that and start believing it, we can't believe it unless we at least first name it. We create the reality through the word. That is part of the beautiful message of the creation story in Judaism. But the second part of that, the corollary of that, is once we've named it, it doesn't mean we believe it. Not right away. It takes repetition. Once we've done it, we are the person who has now done that. But that's slightly different than the person who does that. And right now, Moses knows that he is the person who has been singled out by name. But is he the person who is singled out by name, who is within the favor of this great unknown. Remember, this is the beginning of the 40 years of wandering. 40, typological number, meaning a long time. After we leave something intensely difficult that has locked us down, slavery, we go through a long period of time to go through the changes needed in order to finally get to the promised land. These are all psychological metaphors in addition to the narrative that they represent. This is also the beginning of Moses' 40 years to go through his process, the process of becoming a leader that at the end of that time, in next week's reading, we get the greatest of all prophets who knew God face to face. This Moses is not that Moses yet. That 40 years has to happen. At this point, Moses knows something has happened and maybe has even named it. Listen to this. You have said, I have singled you out, and you have said that I have found favor. I know that I've been that person, but am I that person? I know that I have once or twice stepped through a scary door, but am I the person who steps through scary doors into the unknown? Now to the crux of all this. Verse 13, now if I have truly gained your favor, pray, let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider too that this nation is your people. Hodieni na et derechecha, cause me to know. This verb yadat in biblical Hebrew is the same verb that's used for, and Abraham knew his wife. This is that intimate knowing of something. We are not talking about a human relationship between Moses and the Eternal. We are talking about something much more profound, but it's still external. The form of the verb is causative. Cause me to know. Look at what Moses is doing here. This is not coming from within him. This is not coming from a place of dialogue. This is coming from a place of receiving, but not active receiving, passive receiving. Cause me to know. And then that I may continue in your favor. Yes, on the one side, it is the please guarantee for me success, right? If I know your ways, if I know the right magic rituals, if I know the right magical spells and incantations, then I can keep on being in your favor. Again, this is a dialogue after the law has been given at Sinai. The ways of the Eternal in the narrative have been given. What is Moses begging for? And he's begging for the thing that keeps us from walking through that door when it comes to any advancement, but especially spiritual advancement. It is, let me know that I am in control. You see, this ancient idea of gods is not so different than our magical idea of godness or spirituality that exists today. Moses is essentially asking the same question that he asked when he said, tell me what your name is so that I may tell the people who you are. And the reply from the Eternal is one that is a true mystical reply. Don't think of me as a name. I am all of existence. Yeh, asher, yeh. But Moses is still stuck on God as an object. Why? Because as long as God is human-like or object-like or some sort of an idol or something that we can define in a human way, then we get to control that. As long as we understand the ways of God, as it were, then we have complete control of our destiny. With no question, no discomfort, and we don't have to change one dang bit. And is this dialogue between the Eternal and Moses any different than what we go through over and over again when we know we have to get out of the place that we are in, and we know the door to walk through? And even with that knowledge, that knowledge is the beginning of the bargaining, and the bargaining includes, I will only go through if. There are many reasons that this is the perfect text for the Shabbat in the middle of Sukkot. Sukkot is the Feast of Booths, but it is the celebration or the acknowledgement of impermanence. We sit out in a structure that can be blown away to remind us that our castles, metaphorically, that we build around us, whether it be our lives that we think will never change. Ask the people in Florida in the wake of Hurricane Ian how real our illusions are. Ask people all over the world who can no longer afford to pay their energy bills how real these illusions are. We have a holiday that is supposed to remind us for 8 days that what we think is permanent is actually not. And we can't meditate it every day because we still have to function. We still have to go to our jobs. We still have to earn a living. We still have to exist within the world. But if that's all we do is exist within the world, then we are never prepared for the moment when our world changes. And this is the exact sort of reality that happens when we are ready to make the next step, but we refuse to do it. We sabotage ourselves with not acknowledging what we already know, not acknowledging the wisdom that we have, and more importantly than anything else, demanding guarantees. This is why we read this on Shabbat, Chol, Hamoed, Sukkot, because it's not just the illusions of permanence around us, it's the illusions that we try to drag into our lives whenever we have to make a transition, the illusions that we bring into the birth of a child, that we can have control over the destiny of that child, that we can protect them. That illusion will prevent a child from being able to become. That when we enter into a job, that we are guaranteed what's going to happen into that job. That when we enter into a relationship, we're guaranteed what's going to happen in that relationship. If that's the case, then we're God, and what's the purpose for anything else? Dialogue, the difference, the unknown, that's what makes it interesting. But yet we rely so much on what we, in our illusions, believe to be true. We also bring that illusion into any time that we have to change. The illusion that ultimately, that which I know is what I can bring into the new place, which ultimately means I don't have to change myself at all, which is the greatest illusion of all. It's one thing to say I'm perfect the way that I am. Every morning in our Shacharit services, we start out with words that have a similar intent. Elohai neshama shenatatabi tehorahi. Eternal, the soul that you have given me is pure. But the prayer isn't the soul that you have given me is perfected. Tahor is a little bit different. It means that we are as much of value as anyone else. It doesn't mean that we are a finished product. We become a finished product probably across multiple lifetimes if you take the Kabbalists at face value. But any of us who thinks that we are perfect as we are and we don't need to change, Sukkot is the holiday that's going to try to knock us on our tuchuses and say that's not true. But at some point, something is. And if we keep on demanding that the world change instead of us, we're Pharaoh. We're not even Moses in an absurd dialogue. And here's the scary thing. I have no guarantees that I can offer either. In many ways, this entire initiative, Beit Virtuali, has been my biggest in my life, even bigger than leaving well-paying tech jobs and joining the rabbinate, even more so than that. It has been terrifying, and I will not claim that I have not gone through the same internal bargaining, that I have not wanted some sort of guarantees from either a loud voice or a trumpet from heaven or something deep inside of me. And there are many days that I only function because I have a partner that I've been shown who exists and who I can rely on in this process. Baruch Hashem, I would not have made this without not only that partnership, but many of you out there who, through your feedback and your friendship, help me along, which is maybe the final truth here. We're all stepping through that door of the unknown together. We're all bargaining together. We're all unsure of ourselves. The influencer that you follow who has 6 billion followers, is that an exaggeration? Okay, almost that many followers, is just as unsure, if not more unsure than you are. They just, because of all the followers, cannot afford to look unsure. This Torah reading and Shabbat is the mirror through which we look at the door that we're not entering because we're demanding that we don't have to change. But the answer from the eternal is what pulls us all together. I'm going to go ahead and lead you. That's not what the Hebrew says. The expression is panai yelechu. Panai is my face. And yelechu is a version of to walk, but it will precede you. The thing that we're not allowed to see, lest we die, is the thing that goes in front of us all as we step into the unknown. I finish the mystery of that meaning in part 2, which will be my Simchat Torah sermon next week. Because as of this moment, a few verses later, we learn that no one can see panai, no one can see my face, says the Eternal, and live. And yet the Torah ends with Moses being the greatest of all prophets because he knows God face to face. It's a metaphor, yes, but a beautiful metaphor that Kal v'chomer, if Moses gets to finally know God face to face, that we all have that possibility through that intimacy of dialogue with that which is greater than us to eventually experience something similar and out in front of all of us. Remember, this was not, I will not put my face in front of you, Moses, in front of everyone, in front of all of us as we are going into the unknown. There is that thing which we cannot see and live that is nonetheless the thing that we are being led by. And so acknowledging that hopefully there's enough to meditate on already, I'll go ahead and leave us to go out and sit in the sukkah, to maybe make a little l'chaim, to invite some ushpizin to sit with us, to look around us in gratitude at all of the people who have partnered with us in any capacity in our life to get us where we need to go, to hear the bargaining, to understand that there are no guarantees, but as we walk through with each other, hand in hand, with the acknowledgement that we might just have to change and grow, that we are still stepping through the correct door. Shabbat Shalom. Chag Sameach, everyone. We'll see you next time. Yisrael